Hi there and welcome back to 355 Code. This is the second video in our Connect 4 tutorial. So in the first video, we built out our Connect 4 board and we created an imaginary piece that kind of shows where we'll be dropping a piece into the board. And we created an animation so that on click, it will drop down and mimic a piece falling into the Connect 4 board. So the next stages will really be to do a few things. We're going to want to create alternating colors so that would represent different players taking different turns. And we're going to want to create a back-end game logic which will record which piece was dropped and where it landed in the game. And later on, in another video, we're also going to want to create a victory logic, which will tell us if somebody has won the game or not. So let's take that all one step at a time. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to clean up our drop piece function a little bit, which basically tells us what happens, which basically contains all the logic for what happens from when we mouse over a certain column, including the piece dropping down, etc. So we're going to take out this entire create piece logic over here. And we're going to, sorry about that. And we are going to put that into another function called create piece. So we have here, we're going to put that function right above drop piece. So let's say function create piece. And I'm just going to paste that all in there. Sorry about that. And this function is going to take parameters. So it's going to take grid box as a parameter. And it's going to take a color as a parameter. And then once we get back to our original function, we can just, instead of that whole thing being written out here, in order to clean things up, we can just right here create piece, and we can pass in grid box, and we can pass in piece color. Here we're going to want to pass in a color. Okay, so in order to pass in a color over here, we are going to need to have a certain variable which is going to store the colors of our pieces as we drop them in. So let's go all the way to the top here, and this is where we're going to create some global variables here on top. So let's say we're going to let piece color, and we'll start it off as red. Okay, and then basically over here, when we're creating our piece, right down over here, so we can just call it with piece color. And when we create a piece over here, so what we're going to do is, at the end of this function, we're going to return piece. And that will help us access the piece right here, even after we even though we've separated the creation of this element into a separate function. And in order to do that, let's just say let new piece equal create piece. Okay, and then this new piece will have the value of this piece that was created in the function. And basically over here, everywhere we have piece, we're going to need to replace that with new piece. So let's put that over here, and over here. Okay, and the last thing that we're going to need to do is to change our background color of the new piece to be color. Okay, and I remind you, color here is the argument that's passed as a parameter to the function. And for example, over here, it'll be piece color, and it'll be for now, it'll always be red, but soon we're going to deal with that. So let's just run our code and make sure that it's still working. Grid box size is not defined. To deal with this error of grid box size is not defined, so we could see that in this create piece function, we have grid box, but we didn't actually pass that in as a parameter. So let's just add grid box size here as well, and we can pass that in here when we are creating our piece. And let's try running again, and we're not throwing any errors, and everything is working. So great. So now what we want to do is we want to alternate the color of the piece depending on which turn it is. So that basically after I click once and the piece drops, it should be a different color. So in order to do that, what we're going to do is we are basically just going to change the color of a piece every time we drop the piece. So let's find where we drop the piece, and that's here, okay, in the event listener click. So after we click, the piece drops. And what we're going to do before animating the piece is we are going to, let's take a record of the piece color at this very moment, just in case we need to use it later on. And let's say that is going to be equal to piece color. And then we are going to change this piece color. So let's say if piece color is equal to red, then we're going to change piece color to yellow. And in any other case, then we will change it to red. Okay, so now this should create a situation basically where we have a back and forth, and each time that we click, our piece color should change. And let's check that out. Okay, so it's not working just yet. So let's take a look and see why that might be happening. So let's console here, piece color. And let's see what's going on here. So click red and then it changes to yellow. And now we can see that it is working. And then it stopped working. Okay, so we kind of have a back and forth here where it's kind of working, but not exactly working. And let's try and figure out why that is. So let's try and figure out what the problem is here. Because basically when we drop in a piece, it doesn't necessarily change the color of our piece color. Even though according to the logic here it should. And when we consoled down here, so if we put in here console.log piece color, and then we run the code, then we can see we're running yellow, but sometimes then it changes red, yellow. And then it's just red, and then maybe red, yellow, red. Basically this console is firing twice. And that means that this click event is firing more than once. And to prevent that, what we can do is to remove this event listener when we basically mouse out. Okay, so that we're only really have this click event listener on one of these columns. So let's do that. And we can add that kind of just right down here. And in order to simplify this process, so what we're going to do is take this logic here, and we're going to put that into a function. So let's call that function handle click. And basically that will be everything that we have here. And instead of this function here, we're just going to put in handle click. Okay, and let's just check to see that all our code is still running. Okay, so our code is running as before, so we didn't break anything. And basically what we're going to do is after we add the event listener click, we are going to create another event listener, which is for mouse out. And when we have mouse out, we're going to run a function which basically removes the event listener for the click. So basically to do that, what we need is gridbox.remove event listener. And then we need to name the event listener that we want to remove. Sorry, the event for which we want to remove a listener, and the name of the function that we want to remove, and that's the handle click function. So let's try our code again now. And we drop a ball, and now you can see that the ball color is changing pretty much each time that we drop the ball. Okay, we still have a slight bug. If I drop the ball and then I put my mouse over this same column, so the color will not change, and we can deal with that later on. But we have the basic functionality that we're looking for. So now that we have that, let's go on to create our game logic. And in order to do that, we're going to basically store all the logic of the game in an array. So let's declare an array here, and we'll start it off as empty. We'll call it game. And another thing that we're going to need for this game logic is basically the edges of our board. Okay, we're going to want to be keeping track of the edges, and you'll see why this is important soon. It'll be important both for declaring our game logic and then for checking if it's a win or not. So as you can see here, I've copied over the edge arrays from previous code that I've written. You can try and do this yourself, or you can just copy the arrays I have written out beforehand. And basically these are just the indexes of each of these grid boxes. So here, if this first one is 0, and then this last one is 41. And you can see we have some duplicates because there might be some grid boxes which belong to both the bottom and the right, and those would be the corners. Great, so let's go to creating our game logic. So let's let's create a new function, and we'll call this game logic. So function game logic. And what do we want to do in this function? So in this function, basically what we want to do is to create an array which will store certain information about each one of these grid boxes. So let's think for a second what kind of information we want to store. So for each one of these, we'll want to know, let's say, what its index is, okay, which will be a number from 0 to 41. We'll want to know, sorry, not its z-index, just its index. And we'll want to know what color it is. We'll want to know its edge values. So we'll want to know if it's, if it's top, if it's on the top, if it's on the bottom, if it's on the right, on the left, etc. And we'll also want to keep track of, if it is, what row it is and what column it is. Great, so let's go, and the way we're going to create this array is basically by creating a for loop. And this for loop is going to loop through all of the numbers between I equals 0 and I is smaller than game size. And here in this game logic, let's just pass in game size. Let's call it like this, game size. And here is going to be game size. And we're going to run it as long as, and then, I++. And then within this for loop, what we're going to do is check, we're going to create a object for each grid box. So let's say let grid box equal, okay, and then this object is going to have all the keys that we talked about here. So let's copy that over into there. Let's uncomment it. And so it's going to have an index, and this index is actually going to be equal to I. It's going to have a color, which all the colors are going to start off as blank. It's going to have an edge, which we have to determine soon, but we'll use a variable called edge to populate it. It's going to have a column, and it's going to have a row. Okay, and let's talk about how we find each one of these variables. So for the edge, basically we're going to want to check if this I index belongs to one of these edges. Okay, so we're going to do that using if statements, and basically we're just going to go through each of them and say, okay, if top edge includes this I, then we are going to push this. We are going to push a certain value into this grid box. So let's say let edge, and edge is going to start off as an empty array. And here we're just going to say edge dot push, let's say top. Okay, and basically that will help us keep track and see if this piece is a top edge or not. And for the pieces that are not any kind of edge, they will just have an empty array. And we can basically copy this 4 times. And we're just going to be changing this. We're going to be doing top, bottom, right, and left. And for each one of these, we're going to be pushing something different. So here we're going to just push bottom string, and right, and left. And then basically what this means is that now this edge is an array. And depending on the logic up here, it's going to determine what to push into that edge array. The next thing that we need to figure out is the column. So how do we know what column we are in? So basically we can create a certain variable. Let's call it column for simplicity's sake. And we're going to start it off as 1, right? Because we know that the first grid box, let's call these grid boxes, the first grid box is going to be in the first column. And then as we move on, okay, we're moving forward 1 column. So this is the first column, and then the second, when I equals to 1, we're going to be at the second column and third column, etc. So basically what we need to do is just after, right here at the very end, we're just going to do column plus plus. Okay, so now for I equals 0 will be in the first column, for I equals 1 will be in the second column, etc. But, okay, if at some point we reach a point where where the column is bigger than 7, then we want to go back to column 1, right? Because we only have 7 columns here. So let's add that logic in as well. If column is bigger than 7, then column equals 1. Okay, and basically what this will do is will always give us a value between 1 and 7 for our columns. Great, and now the last thing that we want to do is determine our rows. So for the rows, we can use kind of a creative approach here. And basically, we know that for each grid box, we will have a relationship between I and what row it is. What kind of relationship? So here we know that I is between 0 to 6. And here we know it's between 7 and 13. And if we take any one of these i's and we divide them by 7, we're going to have a value that's less than 1. Okay? And if we divide any of these, the second row by 7, we are going to have a value that's between 1 and 2. Okay? So basically, we can use a method called math.floor. And basically just enter the value of I divided by 7. Okay, and then basically that tells us that divide I by 7 and then round down. So for the first row, we're going to get 0. For the second row, we're going to get 1. Okay, and then we're just going to add 1 to that value. Okay, so let's format our document. And basically what we're going to want to do is each time we create one of these grid box objects, we are going to want to push it into our game array. So then we have here game.push grid box. Okay, and this should create the logic of our game. And let's test it out. So right here we have a create game function, and let's find that. Okay, so this is create game. So the first thing that we're going to do in create game is just create the game logic. And what we need to enter here is a game size. So let's enter for now 42. And let's run our code. We have a typo here. Top edge dot includes with a C. And let's try running our code again. And we're not throwing any errors and everything is working. So let's console, right after we create our game logic, let's console.log game. Okay, and let's try running that. And we can see here that we have an array with 42 objects from 0 to 41. And each one of these has an index, it has a color, it has an array for the edge, and it has a column. Okay, so you can see here that over here, 0 is column 1, row 1. And we have here also 1 is column 1, row 1, so that means we have an issue. Let's check out 2, also column 1, row 1. And let's check one over here. So it seems like our rows are working, but the column is not working. And let's take a look at why that might be. Okay, so basically what I've been doing here is I've been declaring that column should be 1 each time we run through the for loop. And then I've been saying that if column is bigger than 7, column should be equal to 1, but it'll never be bigger than 7 because it'll always be equal to 1. So what we need to do is take this out of the for loop. Okay, so column is only equal to 1 the first time we run it. And let's try that again. So let's take a look here. So 0, 1, okay, that's good. And here now we're in column 2, column 3, column 4, and let's check out, for example, 7, and we see we're back into column 1, row 2. Great, so that means that our game logic is all set up. And now basically what we need to do is whenever we drop a piece, we are going to need to log that information in our game logic. So we're going to be doing that in our next video. And let's just sum up what we did today. So basically we added another feature where our piece will change colors. And this is also visual, but it's also game logic. And this will help us keep track of what we're going to be logging in our game logic when we make changes. And we set up the basis for our game logic by basically creating a virtual representation of this board in an array with objects that keep track of our index, our color, and if they're edge or not. And this is what we're going to be using basically to make visual changes to the game and log those changes. So if you like this video, please don't forget to give a like and to subscribe to our channel so that you'll get notified about the next video in this series and other cool JavaScript videos that teach you how to make games and other things. So I'll see you next time.